Was Muammar Gaddafi a visionary leader who sought to elevate Libya and challenge Western dominance? Or was he a ruthless dictator portrayed by Western media? Hey, I'm Bissy Atkins, and in today's episode of All Things Africa, we are going to explore the rise, reign, and fall of one of the most controversial figures in modern African history, Muammar Gaddafi. His life was a story of bold ambitions, controversy, political defiance, and ultimately, a dramatic fall. So let's get right into it. Before diving into Gaddafi's journey, let's consider two concepts central to his story: leadership and dictatorship. In a post-colonial African context, leadership often required balancing fragile political systems, external pressures from former colonial powers, and the urgent need for development. In this situation, the line between leadership and dictatorship was often blurred. In Libya, this dynamic was especially evident. The country gained independence from Italy in 1951, transitioning into a monarchy under King Idris. But while independence brought formal sovereignty, much of Libya's wealth and influence remained in the hands of foreign powers. Western nations controlled old revenues, and British and American military bases were stationed on Libyan soil. For many Libyans, these realities deepened frustrations over inequality and foreign domination. Born in 1942 to a poor Bedouin family in the Libyan desert, Muammar Gaddafi grew up surrounded by this unrest. It was an era defined by Arab nationalism, championed by leaders like Egypt's Gamal Abdel Nasser. These movements, alongside Libya's growing frustrations with foreign control, shaped Gaddafi's revolutionary outlook and his determination to challenge the status quo. By the 1960s, Gaddafi had joined the Libyan military, where he formed the Free Officers Movement, a group of young officers united by their shared discontent with the monarchy and its ties to foreign powers. Their goal was clear: overthrow King Idris and reclaim Libya for its people. In September 1969, while King Idris was abroad for medical treatment, the group staged a swift, bloodless coup. Within hours, the monarchy had fallen, and Muammar Gaddafi emerged as the leader of a new Libya. Gaddafi's early years in power were defined by bold and unapologetic decisions. One of his first acts was to close British and American military bases, asserting Libya's independence on the global stage. But his most transformative move came in the oil sector. Under King Idris, foreign companies reaped most of the profits from Libya's oil. But under Gaddafi's rule, renegotiation was demanded. He declared that Libyans deserved a greater share of their country's wealth. His famous words to foreign oil companies were, "People who have lived without oil for 5,000 years can live without it again." This move not only enriched Libya, but also set a precedent for resource sovereignty across the global south. With oil revenues flowing into state coffers, Gaddafi implemented sweeping social reforms. Healthcare, education, and housing became free, and Libya achieved one of the highest Human Development Index scores in Africa by the 1980s. He also enforced strict social policies that aligned with his interpretation of Islamic values, banning prostitution, alcohol, and gambling. However, Gaddafi's governance style soon raised a few eyebrows. His Green Book, published in the 1970s, outlined his vision for Jamahira, a state of the masses governed by local councils. While Gaddafi claimed his system was a more authentic form of democracy, critics argued that it was a smokescreen for authoritarian control, as political dissent was crushed and opposition figures disappeared or were exiled. But Gaddafi's vision wasn't confined to Libya. In his early years, he championed pan-Arabism, envisioning a unified Arab world. However, his attempts to reform political unions with countries like Egypt and Tunisia often failed due to ideological clashes and Gaddafi's unpredictable leadership style. By the 1990s, Gaddafi began redirecting his focus to Africa. He advocated for a United States of Africa with a single government, military, and currency backed by gold. This ambitious plan was a direct challenge to Western dominance in Africa and reflected Gaddafi's broader goal of reducing the continent's dependency on foreign power. His support for the African Union and liberation movements such as the South Africans' ANC during apartheid earned him admiration across the continent. At the same time, his growing influence also unsettled Western powers, who increasingly viewed him as a threat to their interests in the region. But Gaddafi's tense relationship with the West had deep roots. In the 1970s and 1980s, his support for revolutionary movements worldwide, including his alleged backing of the militant groups like the Irish Republican Army and certain Palestinian fractions, drew harsh criticism. According to Gaddafi, these actions were misunderstood, and he claimed that his backing of liberation movements was why he was labeled as a terrorist. However, relations between Gaddafi and the West soon reached a breaking point in 1986, when Gaddafi's regime was accused of sponsoring the bombing of a Berlin nightclub that killed 2 American soldiers. In response, the United States launched airstrikes on Tripoli and Benghazi, killing around 70 people, including Gaddafi's adopted daughter. This marked a turning point in Libya's fraught relationship with the West, with US President Ronald Reagan famously labeling Gaddafi the mad dog of the Middle East, further cementing Gaddafi's portrayal as a global antagonist. In addition, the 1988 Lockerbie bombing, which killed 270 people, deepened the animosity further. The attack, attributed to Libyan operatives, led to UN sanctions that crippled Libya's economy and isolated Gaddafi internationally. For years, he refused to cooperate with investigations, but by the late 1900s, he began to seek reconciliation. Gaddafi extradited the Lockerbie suspect, paid compensation to the victims' families, and dismantled Libya's weapon of mass destruction programs. These actions led to the easing of sanctions, and for a brief period in the early 2000s, Gaddafi was welcomed back into the international community. He shook hands with leaders like Tony Blair, signaling a potential new chapter in Libya's relations with the West. Yet even as Gaddafi sought to rebuild Libya's global standing, his regime at home remained brutally oppressive. Human rights organizations documented widespread political imprisonment, torture, and the complete suppression of dissent, reinforcing Gaddafi's reputation as a dictator in the eyes of many. By 2011, Gaddafi's regime faced its greatest challenge, the Arab Spring, a wave of uprisings across the Middle East and North Africa where citizens demanded political reforms and greater freedom. In Libya, the movement began in Benghazi on February 15, 2011, driven by frustrations over political repression, economic struggles, and decades of Gaddafi's rule. What started as peaceful demonstrations quickly spiraled into armed conflict. Gaddafi's forces responded with brutal military crackdowns, escalating the rebellion into a full-blown civil war. Rebel groups from across the country united their desire to oust Gaddafi, taking up arms against his regime. But unity among the rebels was short-lived. Many fractions had conflicting goals, and some were driven by extremist ideologies, creating divisions even as they battled Gaddafi's forces. As the violence intensified, the international community stepped in. On March 17, 2011, the United Nations passed Resolution 1973, authorizing a no-fly zone over Libya and a NATO-led intervention officially aimed at protecting civilians. But while the mission was described as humanitarian, it quickly sparked debates about its true motives. Gaddafi's growing tie with Russia and China and his plan to renationalize Libya's oil industry were seen as significant threats to Western economic interests. To some, these factors appeared to be the real reasons behind NATO's involvement. But with decisions made, NATO launched airstrikes targeting key military installations, tipping the balance in favor of the rebels. As Gaddafi's regime began to crumble, the conflict descended into chaos with allegations of human rights abuses on both sides. Some rebel factions accused dark-skinned Libyans of being pro-Gaddafi mercenaries and carried out violent attacks on them, further destabilizing the country. By October 2011, after months of fighting and NATO-sustained intervention, Gaddafi's regime collapsed. On the 20th of October 2011, he was publicly captured and killed by rebel forces in his hometown of Sirte, bringing an end to his 42-year rule. For many in the West, his death was seen as a triumph for democracy. Hillary Clinton, then US Secretary of State, famously reacted to the news by saying, "We came, we saw, he died," capturing the West's perception of his fall as a victory. But for Libya, the reality was far more complex. In the aftermath of Gaddafi's death, several human rights organizations, including Amnesty International, raised serious concerns about NATO's actions during the intervention. NATO justified its airstrikes as necessary to protect civilians from imminent mass atrocities, but later, investigations revealed that some of the claims used to support the interventions were exaggerated and lacked solid evidence. Amnesty International also criticized NATO for failing to be transparent about civilian casualties and for not investigating incidents where non-combatants were harmed. These findings complicated the narrative around NATO's involvement, raising doubts about whether the mission was truly humanitarian or if it was driven by a broader strategic interest. Despite Gaddafi's removal, his fall did not bring the peace, stability, or democracy many had hoped for. Instead, Libya descended into chaos. Rival militias, some backed by foreign powers, fought for control over Libya's vast resources, particularly its oil reserves. Figures like Ibrahim Jadran seized key oil facilities, blocking exports and costing the state billions in revenue. The result was a fractured nature, torn apart by civil war, economic collapse, and worsening humanitarian crisis. Under Gaddafi's rule, Libya had been one of the most prosperous nations in Africa. Projects like the Great Man-Made River, providing fresh water to millions, while state-funded healthcare and education, though flawed, were functional. But the systems he had built have since collapsed. For some Libyans, the chaos and instability that followed his fall have sparked a sense of nostalgia for an era where things seemed a bit more secure. One resident of the Bani Walid told France 24, "Before 2011, we had security. That's the main thing that's missing in Libya today. The loss of safety and the state-provided stability is something they claim had left significant void in the post-Gaddafi era. However, not everyone sees it in that way. Others hold Gaddafi directly responsible for Libya's current state. Al Jazeera reported on a Libyan engineer who remarked, "What Libya is today is a product of 42 years of systematic destruction." For those who share this view, the chaos isn't just about his removal. It's the legacy of his decades-long rule, which left deep structural weaknesses and contributed to Libya's collapse after his fall. These contrasting perspectives reveal a complex truth. While Gaddafi's methods were far from democratic, the aftermath of his fall has brought on a new wave of challenges for the Libyan people. All right, so I know that was a lot of information to take in, so let's take a little break. So what did we actually learn in today's episode? Firstly, we learned that Muammar Gaddafi was born in 1942 to a poor Bedouin family and rose to power in 1969 by leading a bloodless coup against King Idris. His takeover marked the beginning of his 42-year rule that saw Libya undergo radical economic and social transformations. Secondly, we learned that Gaddafi's leadership transformed Libya through ambitious projects like the Great Man-Made River and state-funded healthcare and education. However, his governance was marked by authoritarianism, suppression of dissent, and a complex relationship with the West. Thirdly, we learned that Gaddafi's ambitions extended beyond Libya. His push for a United States of Africa earned him admiration across the continent, but his growing influence also unsettled Western powers, leading to tensions that would define much of his rule. Fourthly, we learned that NATO's involvement in Libya's 2011 uprising remains highly debated. While the intervention was framed as a humanitarian mission, later reports suggested that exaggerated claims were used to justify military action. This has led to ongoing discussions about the true motives behind the intervention and its lasting impact on Libya. And lastly, we learned that while Gaddafi's fall in 2011 was celebrated by some as a victory for democracy, it left Libya in turmoil. The aftermath has been marked by internal conflict, economic collapse, and contrasting perspectives on his legacy. Which African country is known for its traditional Gero festival, where men compete in beauty contests to win the admiration of women? Is it A, Niger, B, Senegal, C, Mali, or D, Chad? Muammar Gaddafi's legacy defies easy categorization. His economic reforms and Pan-African vision positioned him as a leader who sought to uplift his nation and the continent. At the same time, his authoritarian rule, marked by human rights abuses and political oppression, paints a more complex picture, one of a leader whose ambition and ideology both inspired and divided. Reflecting on his legacy, Gaddafi once remarked,
عملت من أجل الآخرين.
That I worked for the others, to give service to the others. That's the last
ما عملتش حاجة لنفسي.
So
I
Gaddafi,
didn't do anything for myself. To his supporters, these words reflect a vision of African unity and Libya's sovereignty. To his critics, however, they stand as a contradiction to the realities of his authoritarian rule. This duality continues to shape how his life and leadership are remembered. As we conclude, was Muammar Gaddafi a visionary leader, or the ruthless dictator many media outlets portrayed? Perhaps the answer lies not in choosing one side, but in embracing the complexity of his legacy. A legacy that challenges us to understand the intricacies of power, ambition, and leadership in post-colonial Africa. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of All Things Africa. If you've enjoyed learning about the complex narrative surrounding Gaddafi's leadership, which I'm sure you may have, why don't you like this video, share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe for All Things Africa.